Welcome to Hidden Ties, where every story hides a deeper truth. I didn't think I could be blindsided like that, especially by my sister. But there it was. The moment I walked into the housewarming party, I found out she'd used my name to take out an 800K loan to buy the house. And she didn't even tell me. Before we continue, tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from? I'd love to know. I hadn't even planned to go. The invitation to my sister's housewarming had come like an afterthought, sent through a group text with the rest of the family, looking more like a formality than a personal invitation. But I figured I should show up, you know? Family's family, and I hadn't seen my sister in a while. I wasn't sure why, but something about her seemed different lately. She had always been a bit unpredictable, but this felt like a step too far. I'm Clara, 52, and I've lived a pretty simple life in a small town on the outskirts of a bigger city. I've always kept to myself mostly, with my work at a law firm being my primary focus. I don't have kids, never felt the need to, just me and a cat named Whiskers. Things were fine, I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable enough, and I liked it that way. I liked having things in order. I arrived at the housewarming around 3 p.m., a little late as usual. The invitation said casual, but it was hard to get a sense of what that meant. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to bring anything, so I grabbed a bottle of wine and figured I'd play it by ear. I walked into the living room, where a small group was mingling, and immediately my gaze shot across the room. The house was stunning. Too stunning, in fact. It wasn't just the size that caught my attention. It was the way everything was done so perfectly, so expensively. Every corner of the place gleamed, the marble countertops, the high-end furniture. It screamed luxury. My sister June was bouncing around the room like she was the queen of the castle, laughing and chatting with everyone. She saw me and waved me over, beaming from ear to ear. "Clara, so glad you made it," she called out, wrapping her arms around me in a tight hug. "It's so good to see you." "Yeah, you too." I couldn't help but stare at the place. "This house is amazing, June." She looked almost too proud. "I know, right? It's everything I've ever wanted." I couldn't stop myself from asking, "How'd you pull this off? You just moved in a few weeks ago, didn't you?" June grinned, her eyes sparkling. "You know, a little bit of hard work, a little bit of luck, and a lot of help from some very generous people," she winked, clearly avoiding the question. Ding. I took a breath and decided not to push it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't until later, when we were sitting around the dining room table, that I learned the truth. A couple of June's friends had already left, and I was talking to her alone in the corner, sipping my wine. "You really didn't tell me how you were able to afford this," I said, the words escaping me before I could stop them. June looked at me with a mischievous smile. "Oh, that's because it's a funny story, actually." I furrowed my brows. "A funny story?" "Yeah," she said, glancing around to make sure no one else could hear. "It's not just my name on the mortgage." I froze. "What do you mean?" She stopped herself mid-sentence, then leaned in. "I kind of used your name." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it hit me like a slap. I stared at her, blinking. "You... what?" "I took out an 800K loan, Clara," she said with a shrug, as if it was no big deal. "I thought you'd be fine with it. You've got a good credit score, and I'm sure you won't mind paying it back when the time comes." My heart dropped into my stomach, and I barely held onto my glass of wine. "You're kidding, right?" "Nope," she said, tapping the table with her fingers. "The paperwork's all signed. The house is in my name, of course, but the loan? All yours." The world around me started to spin. I felt like I was going to be sick. "June, you can't. Why would you do something like that without even asking me first?" She laughed, a little too loudly. "Oh, come on. It's not like it's a big deal. You're family, and I knew you'd help me out if I needed it." She seemed almost proud of herself. I stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over my wine. "This isn't funny, June. You can't just. I took a breath, struggling to process what she'd just said. How long has this been going on? She paused, her eyes shifting, and then she said, A couple of months now. I thought I'd wait for the right moment to tell you, but honestly, I've been meaning to talk to you about it. I shook my head, disbelief flooding my thoughts. You don't get it. You can't just make decisions for me like this. Relax, she said, still casually sipping her wine. You're going to be fine. You've got the money, right? You can always pay it back. I don't know how you thought this was going to work. I stopped myself, suddenly realizing how badly I'd been humiliated. But there was no stopping it now. I was in it, and I had to get out. Before I could say anything else, June's phone rang, and she picked it up, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. Oh, it's just work. I'll be right back. I couldn't move. My chest felt tight, and I had to stop myself from screaming. I stood there, staring at June's back as she chatted away on her phone, her voice a mixture of light laughter and business jargon. Her words were meaningless to me now. Each syllable felt like a slap to the face. The longer I stood there, the more I could feel the weight of her betrayal sinking in. She didn't even care. I could see it in her posture, in the way she was completely disconnected from what she had just dropped on me. As if it was no big deal. I was shaking. I needed to get out of there to process what had just happened. I turned to leave, but then I realized something. I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't let this slide. I went outside, leaning against the railing of the porch to collect myself. I needed to think, to figure out how she thought this was going to work. How could she put me in this situation without asking me first? The audacity. It wasn't just about the loan. It was about the complete disregard for me, for everything I had worked for, and for what she knew I would never have agreed to. I pulled out my phone, but there was no one I could call. My parents had always been distant, and they were no help in situations like this. They had always told me to keep my distance from June ever since she was a teenager. They'd warned me that she was irresponsible, but I'd never really seen it until now. Clara, you're overreacting, I muttered to myself, trying to calm my nerves. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. I was livid. I wasn't going to let her off the hook this easily. I stayed out there for a few more minutes, breathing in the crisp evening air, trying to gather my thoughts. Then I walked back inside, my hands still trembling, but with a new resolve. June was still on the phone, her back turned to me, so I decided to sit down at the kitchen table and wait. About 20 minutes later, she hung up and strolled back into the room, smiling. All right, where were we? I wanted to scream, to lash out at her. But instead, I took a deep breath and said, I'm not going to let this go, June. She raised an eyebrow. What are you talking about? The loan, I said, my voice icy. I'm not just going to cover this. You've put me in a terrible position, and I'm not going to clean up your mess, she scoffed. It's not a mess, Clara. You're being dramatic. You'll see. You're not in as bad of a spot as you think. I stood up and walked toward her. I don't care how you see it. You have no right to make decisions for me like that. I didn't give you permission to use my name for a loan. She took a step back, suddenly defensive. You're making it sound worse than it is. The house is mine, not yours. The loan's just a formality. No, I snapped. That loan is mine. My name, my credit. You've risked everything I've worked for. And for what? So you could live in this house? I gestured around the room, my voice rising. You've taken advantage of me, June, and I'm done. For the first time that evening, she looked taken aback. Her face flushed, and for a second, I thought I might have gotten through to her. But then she sneered, her smile returning, colder this time. I thought you'd understand, but I guess I was wrong. The words stung, but they didn't pierce my resolve. I didn't care about her excuses anymore. I was done being her pawn. I'm going to fix this, I said firmly. I don't know how, but I will. June crossed her arms, eyes narrowing. Fix it? How? You can't just undo a contract, Clara. You've got no leverage here. I'll figure something out, I said, turning toward the door. But don't ever do something like this again. Fine, she said dismissively. But don't expect me to come running to you when it all falls apart. I won't, I replied coldly, stepping out of the house and into the night. I didn't go back to my car immediately. Instead, I walked around the neighborhood for a while, trying to think. The whole evening felt like a nightmare, but I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just walk away from this. What June had done wasn't just a financial blunder, it was a betrayal. She'd violated my trust, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The next few days were a blur. I didn't sleep much, couldn't focus at work, and every time my phone buzzed, I braced myself for a message from June, but it never came. She had no interest in apologizing, and I knew better than to expect anything less than more of her indifference. I was furious, beyond angry. I had spent years building my career, keeping my finances in check, maintaining my credit, and there she was, throwing it all away with one reckless decision. What kind of sister does that? The anger brewed inside me, but I couldn't just stew in it. I needed to act. I needed to regain control of my life, my name, and my future. I spent the next few days making calls. I spoke to a lawyer, someone who'd handled financial disputes before. I found out, much to my horror, that trying to reverse a loan was no simple task. You can't just cancel it, the lawyer explained. Once the loan is signed, it's binding. You'd have to either pay it off or negotiate with the lender. Or you could take June to court if you wanted to claim that she forged your signature or deceived you into signing. Are you telling me I'm stuck? I asked, my voice sharp. I'm afraid so, he said, his tone sympathetic but firm. If your name is on the mortgage, you're legally responsible for the debt. I hung up the phone, feeling even more helpless than before. I had no intention of letting June get away with this, but the legal road seemed like a nightmare. There had to be another way, and that's when it hit me. I wasn't going to play by her rules. I wasn't going to beg or plead for forgiveness. I'd been humiliated, and now it was time to get even, on my terms. I wasn't a confrontational person by nature, but the fire inside me burned hot. I would take control of this situation, and I would find a way to make June feel the sting of her actions. I needed leverage. I knew she was up to something else. I just had to figure out what. For the next few days, I played the waiting game. I watched June's social media like a hawk, looking for any hint that she was struggling to make payments or that the house wasn't as secure as it seemed. I knew that beneath all her bravado, she had a way of getting herself into financial trouble. And this house? It wasn't just expensive, it was a risk. If she had to pay back an $800K loan, she would have to keep up appearances, or everything would come crashing down. I kept my eyes peeled for anything that could give me the upper hand, and sure enough, it didn't take long for me to find something. I was scrolling through Facebook late one night, unable to sleep, when I saw a post from June. She was standing outside the house, posing with a big grin and a sign that read, "Welcome to my dream home." Beneath it, there was a comment from one of her friends, something about how proud they were of her for making it happen. But it was the next comment that caught my eye. A friend of hers, someone I didn't recognize, had written, "That house looks amazing, but I heard you're having some issues with the loan. Hope you're keeping up with the payments." My stomach dropped. I immediately took a screenshot of the comment and sent it to my lawyer. He was as surprised as I was. "This could be useful," he said. "If she's having trouble with the payments, it might prove that she's not able to keep up with the loan. You could use that as part of your case if you decide to go to court." I felt a surge of hope. Finally, something I could use. But I wasn't about to go to court just yet, not without taking a few more steps. I had to let June know that I wasn't someone she could walk all over. I wasn't going to let this slip away without getting something in return. The next morning, I put my plan into motion. I called a few more people, those who might have some insight into her financial situation, friends of hers, mutual acquaintances who might have heard something. The whispers weren't loud, but they were there. And soon I had a list of things June had done in the past to get herself into debt. Credit cards she'd maxed out, loans she'd taken for vacations, her history of living beyond her means. I could see it now, her carefully constructed image of success, built on a house of cards, and I was going to take it down. But I had to be careful. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of revenge. It was about making sure she understood the consequences of what she'd done. I wasn't going to let her ruin me and walk away scot-free. I wasn't going to let her laugh at me anymore. I spent the next few weeks gathering evidence, setting everything up. It was slow, but every conversation, every small piece of information brought me closer to the truth. I was starting to see a pattern. June was careless. Too careless. She hadn't thought things through, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. I hadn't planned to confront June until I had everything in place, but the waiting was starting to eat away at me. Every time I thought about what she'd done, my stomach churned. The more I gathered, the more I saw how truly reckless she was. I had all the pieces. Now it was time to use them. But I had to pick my moment carefully. I needed her to be vulnerable, to make a mistake that I could exploit. That moment came sooner than I expected. I was at work one afternoon when my phone buzzed. It was a message from June. "I need to talk. Can you meet me later? I have something important to discuss." I sat there for a moment staring at the screen. The message was direct, and something about it felt different. It wasn't the usual casual tone. She didn't use her usual emojis or upbeat language. There was an edge to it, a sense of urgency. I immediately felt a knot form in my stomach. Something was wrong, but I wasn't going to let that stop me. If June thought she could just walk back into my life and try to smooth things over with an apology, she had another thing coming. I was done being the one who always had to clean up after her messes. I had a score to settle. I texted her back, keeping my tone cool. "Sure, let's meet at 7 p.m. I'll be free then." "Great," she replied, and that was it. The rest of the workday dragged on, my mind unable to focus on anything but the upcoming meeting. What did she want? Was she going to try to manipulate me again, make me feel guilty? Or maybe she thought I'd be so desperate to fix things that I'd let her off the hook? I couldn't be sure, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I was done being the victim. At exactly 7 p.m., I pulled up to the small cafe where we had agreed to meet. June was already sitting at a corner table, fiddling with her phone. She looked up when I walked in, and for a brief moment I saw something in her eyes. Anxiety, maybe. "Hey," she said, her voice unusually subdued. "Thanks for meeting me." I sat down across from her, feeling the weight of everything I'd learned settle into my bones. "What's going on, June? You seemed pretty urgent in your message." She sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "It's about the house. I've been having some trouble with the payments." I wasn't surprised. I had already figured it out, but I let her continue, curious to hear how she was going to spin this. "I knew it was going to be tough," she said, her voice shaky. "But I didn't realize just how bad it would get. I've been working extra hours, trying to get the money together, but it's not enough. And now the bank is threatening to foreclose." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been waiting for this, expecting it, but hearing it out loud was different. This wasn't just a bad decision, it was a disaster. "I'm sorry, Clara," she said, looking down at her hands. "I know I messed up. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I wasn't sure if I believed her, but I couldn't let her off the hook just because she was apologizing. I had to be strong. I had to stay in control. "So, what's your plan?" I asked, my voice flat. "I don't know," she admitted. "I was hoping you could help. Maybe we could refinance the loan, or I could borrow some money from you to get back on track." I couldn't believe it. There she was, sitting across from me, asking me to bail her out again. After everything she'd done, after using my name without my consent, she was asking me for help. "No," I said firmly, cutting her off before she could continue. "I'm not going to help you with this, June. You put me in a terrible position, and now you want me to fix it for you?" "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her voice cracking. "I really thought I could handle it. I didn't know the loan would be such a burden. and now I'm in way over my head. I could see the guilt in her eyes, but it didn't make me feel better. It didn't erase the damage she'd done. You should have thought about that before you took out the loan in my name. You should have asked me for help, instead of assuming I'd just go along with it. I know, she whispered. I messed up. I'm really sorry, Clara. I don't know what to do anymore. I stared at her for a moment, watching her crumble under the weight of her own mistakes. It should have made me feel good to see her finally acknowledge what she'd done. But it didn't. The damage had already been done, and no apology could undo it. I'm not the one you need to be apologizing to, I said quietly. Her eyes widened. What do you mean? I've been working on something, I said, leaning in slightly. You've really put me in a difficult situation, June. But now you're going to have to face the consequences of your actions. Her face paled as the words hit her. What are you talking about? I've got evidence, I said, my voice steady. I've been gathering everything I can, and trust me, this isn't just going to go away. You're going to have to deal with the fallout from this, and I'm not going to let you drag me down with you. June's eyes darted around, and I saw the panic starting to set in. For the first time, she looked like she truly understood the gravity of what she had done. Clara, please, what do you want from me? I leaned back in my chair, watching the realization dawn on her. I want you to understand that I'm done being your safety net. You're going to have to fix this on your own. I'm not cleaning up your mess anymore. For the first time that evening, June didn't respond with her usual bravado. She was silent, looking down at her hands, the weight of what I had said settling over her like a heavy blanket. It felt like the calm before the storm, and I knew this was only the beginning. The days after our meeting were tense. I could almost feel the ripple effects of what had just happened in that cafe, like a storm that had yet to fully hit. June had retreated into herself, and I felt the air around us thicken with the unspoken truth that things would never be the same. She hadn't reached out again, which only made the silence feel more like a threat. I'd exposed her, and she knew it. She wasn't going to make this easy for me. I was restless. Despite everything I had done to regain control, I could still feel the weight of the loan hanging over me. I knew I'd made the right choice. There was no way I was going to let her drag me into this mess. But there was one thing I couldn't ignore. My name was still tied to that house, still tied to her failure. I couldn't just let the situation sit, hoping it would magically resolve itself. There were consequences to her actions, and I needed to make sure she understood that. The problem was, I wasn't sure exactly how to make her face the reality of what she'd done. She'd already shown me how far she was willing to go to avoid responsibility. Now, I had to figure out how to make her pay. A few days later, I got a phone call from my lawyer. I've been looking into this further, he said, his voice tight with concentration. And I think we might have a way to get you out of this mess. Tell me more, I said, sitting up straighter, feeling a flicker of hope. There's a clause in the loan agreement, he explained. It states that the bank can, in certain circumstances, request a full repayment of the loan if they find that the borrower has committed fraud or misrepresentation. And given the situation, with your name on the loan without your consent, it could be argued that she misrepresented the circumstances when she applied for the loan. I felt my pulse quicken. So, what does that mean for me? You would have to prove that she used your name without permission, he said. But with the evidence you have, we might be able to convince the bank to hold her solely responsible. It could take time, but it's a way out for you. A weight lifted off my shoulders. There was a chance. A real chance. But I wasn't ready to jump into any legal battle just yet. I knew it would drag on for months, if not longer, and I wasn't sure I had the stomach for that kind of drawn-out fight. But something inside me told me I needed to go one step further. This wasn't just about getting out of the loan. It was about making sure June knew that her actions had consequences. She couldn't get away with treating people like this, especially not me. So, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to go to court and get out of the loan. I was going to make her life uncomfortable. I was going to apply pressure, so much pressure that she'd have no choice but to face the consequences of her actions. It started with small things, calls to her friends, people who knew about her financial troubles. I let them know what had been going on, not in an overtly malicious way, but just enough to put the idea out there that June wasn't the reliable person she'd always tried to appear to be. I knew June hated anyone knowing her business, especially when it came to her finances, and I wasn't going to let her off the hook. The more I talked to people, the more I realized how much I had been holding back. I'd always been the one to support her, the one to clean up after her mistakes. But now I was done. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. The whispers started to spread. People who had once looked up to June were starting to talk. Her reputation began to tarnish, and that was only the beginning. The final nail in the coffin came one evening when I received an email from the bank. They'd been following up on the issues with the loan, and had sent me a notice about an impending meeting with June to discuss the situation. I wasn't surprised. She had to be feeling the pressure now. I could almost picture her frantic calls to the bank, trying to smooth things over. But the truth was, no amount of charm could undo the damage she had done. The loan was in my name, and that was a problem she couldn't escape. Not this time. The day of the meeting arrived, and I knew I had to face June again. I wasn't sure how she'd react, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me again. I showed up at the bank early, waiting in the lobby. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel my heart rate pick up. I wasn't scared, not anymore, but there was still something deeply unsettling about what I had to do. This wasn't just about getting justice for myself, it was about standing up to someone who had hurt me, who had put me in a position where I had no choice but to act. When June walked in, her face was pale, and her shoulders were tense. She avoided my eyes at first, but I could feel her gaze on me as we sat down together. The bank representative, a stern, middle-aged woman named Janet, looked between us, clearly sensing the animosity in the room. "Let's get started," she said, glancing at the papers in front of her. "We're here to discuss the terms of the loan and to figure out how we can resolve the situation." I let June speak first, though it was clear she was nervous. She fumbled through her words, trying to explain that she was working hard to fix everything, but I could see through it all. She was losing control. Finally, I spoke up. "I think the real issue here is that I was never consulted before the loan was taken out in my name," I said, my voice firm but calm. "And now, I'm stuck with the debt because of her actions." June's face reddened, and she opened her mouth to protest, but Janet cut her off. "I understand the concern," she said, her tone no nonsense, "and we will look into it." For the first time, I saw June truly panic. This wasn't something she could talk her way out of. This was happening, and I wasn't going to let her off easy. As we sat there, with the weight of everything crashing down on her, I knew the truth. I had won. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my peace. June had made her choices, and now she would have to face the consequences. The weeks following the meeting with the bank were a blur. The more I reflected on what had happened, the clearer it became that there was no going back to the way things were. I had crossed a line, and I could feel the change deep inside me. I had fought for myself, something I hadn't done in years, and I had won. But now, as June's situation deteriorated, I couldn't help but wonder, was this really enough? Was she truly going to face the consequences of her actions, or would she somehow weasel her way out again, as she always had? I'd been careful, calculated, patient. I didn't want to go too far. I didn't want to be seen as vindictive. But as the days passed, I found myself checking in on June's every move. Her social media was still filled with pictures of her perfect life, pretending everything was fine. But the cracks were starting to show. The posts grew less frequent, and the comments from her friends and followers started to shift from supportive to critical. She wasn't fooling anyone anymore. People were starting to talk, not just about her financial problems, but about her tendency to take advantage of others, to manipulate situations for her own gain. And when people started to dig, the truth always came to the surface. The final blow came one evening when I received another call from my lawyer. His voice was thick with satisfaction. "Clara, I think we've got it. The bank is moving forward with a foreclosure. They've already sent her notice. It's only a matter of time before she loses everything." I felt a strange satisfaction at those words. For months, June had been riding high, pretending like she was untouchable, like she could get away with anything. But now, it was all unraveling. The house she'd so proudly bought, using my name to back it up, was slipping from her fingers. And for the first time, I realized that what I had done wasn't just about getting even, it was about justice. June's pride had always been her shield. The house was her crown jewel, her symbol of success. But as the days ticked by, that symbol of success was crumbling. She tried everything she could to avoid the inevitable. She made frantic calls, met with her lawyers, begged her friends to help her out. But it was too late. The bank had already decided. I received a message from June late one night. It was short and to the point. No sweet talk, no apologies, just a simple request. "Clara, I need to talk. Please, let's meet." For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to ignore her. I'd done enough. But then I realized this could be the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when she finally understood the full extent of what I had done and why. I agreed to meet her the next day at the same cafe where we'd had our last conversation. The air was heavy with anticipation, and when I walked in, I saw her sitting by the window, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. Her usual bravado was gone. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her coffee cup. "Clara," she said softly when I approached. I don't know what to say." I sat down across from her, my gaze steady. "You don't need to say anything. You've already said enough." Her face flushed, and she looked down at the table, her fingers running over the edge of her cup. "I didn't think it would end like this," she whispered. "I didn't think I'd lose everything." "You thought you could get away with it," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You thought you could use me and everyone else and walk away unscathed, but the truth always catches up with you, June." She swallowed hard, her eyes flickering to mine before she quickly looked away again. "I never meant for it to go this far. I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do." "But you did know," I said, my voice gaining strength. "You knew exactly what you were doing when you took out that loan in my name. You didn't think about the consequences. You didn't think about me. You just thought about what you wanted." She looked up at me then, and for the first time, I saw the truth in her eyes. Not the deflection, not the manipulative charm, just raw, unfiltered fear. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice small. "I know I messed up. I don't know what to do anymore. I've lost everything." I sat back in my chair, looking at her as the weight of the situation settled between us. It wasn't pity I felt for her. It was something else, something deeper. I realized in that moment that June wasn't the same person she had been when this all started. Her facade had cracked, and I was the one who had helped bring it down. "I think," I said slowly, my words cutting through the tension, "you need to learn the hard way. You need to face the consequences of your actions. This isn't just about the money anymore. This is about you understanding that you can't keep hurting people, using them, and thinking there won't be any fallout." She nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I get it. I really do. I know I can't keep running from this." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything that had led to this moment. "I'm not here to save you, June. I'm not here to fix this for you. You've got to figure it out on your own. But maybe, just maybe, this is the lesson you needed to learn." We sat there in silence for a long time, the weight of the truth hanging heavy in the air between us. June's world was falling apart, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. But for the first time in years, I felt free. Free from the guilt, the manipulation, the constant cleaning up after her mistakes. I had finally taken control of my own life. When I left the cafe that evening, I felt lighter than I had in months. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy for either of us, but it was the road we both had to walk. June had made her bed, and now she would have to lie in it. As for me, I was done being the victim, done letting her drag me down. It was time for me to move on, to reclaim the life that I deserved. And no matter what came next, I would always remember this. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about retaliation. It's about walking away. And that's exactly what I was going to do.